Hey guys, Azrach here and welcome back to my channel. Today we're doing another action figure 3D print and paint. So we're 3D printing the Ocean Emperor action figure and painting him as well. So as you can see now, I've got a build plate full of the Ocean Emperor parts. So this is the Uniformation GK2 printer and its build plate. So really nice printer, really nice build plate. For the resins here, I'm using the Resione M58 60% and the Resione Anti-Impact 40%. It's a really nice mix and really good for action figures. So hopefully you can try it out, but let's get into the video. So here we have everything laid out on my table. It's basically how I map out things and just basically map out parts that I need for the figure. So once I figured out all the parts that needed to be black, I put them on alligator clips so that I can start painting them, and alligator clips basically make it so that it's easier to paint around the item and I don't get anything on my fingers. So that's the cool part. Here you can see that I'm using the Iwata Eclipse HPCS airbrush. This is the airbrush I use for most of my paints, but it's a really good airbrush. Here I'm spraying out the Vallejo black primer through the airbrush so that I can cover all the parts and get them really nice and black, so that if I want to put more paint on top, the primer acts as the base layer. And because the primer is the color I want it to be, I can just seal it and then the primer can be the base color. I'm not sure if it's common practice to actually get more paint on top of the primer to get like the right color on top of the paint or the figure parts, but yeah, this is what I usually do. If the primer is the right color, I just use the primer. And with the Iwata Eclipse, it's just such a really good airbrush. The airflow, the pressure, the control you have on with the paints, really nice, and I really appreciate that this airbrush can do such a good job. And I try to keep my airbrush as clean as possible at most times, which really works out, and then it kind of helps me with adding that next layer on to the figure. And I think I'm just usually when I paint, if I'm changing colors, I'll just clean out my airbrush every time, but here I'm just painting everything in black. I go through all the parts, but I don't show you that because it's just gonna be a long video. So yeah, here I'm just painting everything black. Once the black priming is done, we move on to the gold accents onto the belt of the figure. So in this particular figure, the belt is very gold, so I've painted that gold here, as you can see. And also I add some accents to the legs as well, because in the comic series the figure has gold going across the thighs, and also with the gauntlets, or basically the hands, they also have gold accents. So I'm painting everything that's gold accent. And then we move on to the gray primer. So now I'm priming everything that's a lighter shade or a different color. Instead of black, doing it gray, so that there's a base layer of primer on the figure and I can paint everything on top as well. But because it's a lighter base layer, all the colors on top pop more, and black kind of dulls everything down. So with the gray primer, it just helps me make everything stick out a little bit more and look a little bit more cleaner. So that's why I'm using the gray primer here. And with the gray primer, I realized that I didn't need to get too much of a layer on the figure because it's just gray, so I go with thin layers. So once all the gray parts are done, we move on to the red-orange mix. So I use the Vallejo orange and Vallejo red for this paint. So I used 2 parts red, 1 part orange, so that the color is a little bit darker. In this comic series, the figure has a darker kind of orange clothing, so all the armor is darker, so I used that formula to get the colors right. So I am very colorblind, so my wife definitely helped me get a very accurate kind of color, and I really like the way the color looks. It's really clean, really flat. I mean, I would have enjoyed adding some highlights or shading to it as well to make the figure pop a little bit more, but I think what we've done so far is really nice for version 1. I might eventually do version 2, where I get a little bit better at painting and I add some highlights, shadows, all of that into the figure. But at the moment, all I'm doing is doing like a flat coat of this red orange ish color that I've made, and then putting it onto all the parts that should be that color. Alright, after we paint all of our parts the orange red tinge, we move on to our leaf gold again, so that we can get the trident and some belt accents to be gold as well. So basically what I'm doing here is thinning down the gold as much as possible, and then I stuck a Q-tip at the bottom of the trident so that I could paint it gold, and then I did it all around the top bit, and also with the bottom bit it's a clip hanger that's holding on to the tip or the peg, and I'm just painting everything gold here. There is also Aquaman's bandolier or belt that goes around his chest, so I've already painted that brown, so I'm only putting on some accent colors. It is a Vallejo brown, and I basically use my airbrush to spray the brown onto the figure part, and then I put the gold accents on. Here we have the painted head sculpt, and most of the paint was done by my wife. I don't know what colors she used particularly for the head sculpt, but I think that she's done a tremendous job. We don't have too much shading going on, but I think it still looks awesome. And I let everything dry or sit for like 24 hours before I hit it with top coat. So for the top coat, I'm using the Mr. Super Clear semi-gloss coat, so that it has like a little bit of a plasticky kind of shine to it. And this is everything laid out in my light box so that we can start putting it together. So after all the parts are ready, we're basically gonna shave off some of the excess material. This is because when I print my figures, I do overexpose the print slightly so that basically all the parts print well and there is some tightness to the joints. But in doing that, all the holes that I make on the figure that accepts pegs going in, they do shrink a little bit. So to get that back to the actual size it should be, and also to compensate for the pegs being slightly thicker, I'm shaving off some of the excess material. My tip as always is to go slow and test your parts as you drill out a little bit at a time. If you drill too much, you basically can't put more resin back, so always drill a little bit and test the parts out. Now that we have all the excess parts removed, we can now move on to joining the action figure together. So first off, we'll start off with the elbow. So a quick note here, I did get the elbows wrong, so I've basically put the left elbow on the right and the right on the left, but I do change it in the video off camera. But yeah, basically I'm just pegging in the short nub on the bottom and the long nub on the top, because the long one basically goes all the way through to the bicep right up to the shoulder and it connects there. Now I'm doing the other side of the elbow as well. As you can see here, a little bit of pressure is required and you might need to get angles right sometimes, but it should peg straight through. And you basically have to do it for the top and the bottom for both sides, and it shouldn't be that difficult. You might require a little bit of pressure, and once it's in, it should articulate well. And here we have the biceps piece basically getting put on top of the part. I did heat it up a little bit, and the bicep was slightly too tight because there was an artifact of the support remaining inside the bicep, so that did cause a little bit of a problem for me. I'll show you later as well, but there was a little bit of a paint rub because of the tight bicep and the artifact, so you can see that now here. And yeah, that was kind of disappointing, but it was my first time printing this figure, so there were some things bound to happen. On this side of the bicep, there was no excess material, or there was no support that was sticking out, so everything pegged in really well and it articulates well as well. So it's just unfortunate that it happened to the other hand or the other bicep, but it is what it is. So you also peg the forearms in to the biceps and the elbow structure, and both hands are now done. For the wrist peg, they're pretty small, but you might need to put a little bit of heat on them. I did put a little bit of heat on this joint, and then now the wrist is ready, and I plug it into the forearm, and I also plug the hand in, so that shouldn't be too difficult. You might need to just make sure that you get all the excess removed so that it slides in easily and you're not putting too much pressure on it, because resin does sometimes tend to break. I have an idea to kind of make it a little bit stronger in the next figure, so when I do that, I'll definitely showcase it and show it to you guys as well. But here we're doing the shoulders as well. This is a heat and pop situation. The shoulders have been heated for about 30 seconds with a hair dryer, and then I've pushed the peg in, and I'm pushing the sides so that it's more flush and more seamless when I put everything together. So that's what I'm doing for the other side of the shoulder now, and it should go in pretty easily. And once you get the sides kind of tight, it should fit in really nice. With the thighs and the knees, same thing. The thighs, if you heat them up, it will become a little bit more squishy and more pliable, so you can put the knee joint right in. It articulates well, no issues there. There is a little bit of friction that holds on to the figure, so it's a really nice joint. And then you can now move on to the calves. Same thing for the calves, we basically heat it up and put it onto the figure, which shouldn't be too difficult because the sides are a little bit thin, they should be more pliable, and once we put it on, we do want to press the sides so that it stays on the figure better. For the ankles, we just heat it up and put the ankle peg together similar to the wrist, and then now we can put the ankles into the calves and then also put the feet on. So the feet, you might need to scrape a little bit out of the feet and the calves as well to get everything working fine, but if you take it slowly and do it correctly, it should be fine. With the toe piece as well, also just heat it up, put it onto the figure, shouldn't be too difficult. And I'm just trying to articulate things a little bit here so that everything's flowing and not stuck. But everything looks fine here. Here you get a demo of the knee articulation, which goes to about that much, and the fin does not run into the thighs, which is really good. And now we can start the same process for the other leg, and I'll skip that part a little bit because it's the same thing. We can move on to the drop down hinge. So what we want to do with the drop down hinge is the peg should be put halfway through from the back. You put on both of the drop down joints from either side, and then once everything is aligned, heat up the part if you need to and press everything in, and you can use a little bit of force on this as well. It's a strong joint, so there's very minimum chances of breaking. So once everything's put together, you can then plug the drop down joint into the trunks and put a little bit of glue at the bottom once everything's settled down so that it sticks better and it doesn't fall out. So once that is done, we can move on to the butterfly joint. So the butterfly joint is basically just a butterfly piece with a socket that sits within. So the inside socket, there are two distinct holes within the butterfly joint that you can put it into. So heat it up and you can push it in, and now you can push in the shoulder joint into the butterfly socket. Heat up the socket and the butterfly joint so that the shoulders can go in, which is easy. And then once all of that is connected, we want to take the biceps and plug it into the shoulder joint like so that everything's connected and the arm is fully done. We do the same thing with the other arm, and you want to lift up the arm once everything's connected so that the shoulder joint is fully extended. The reason you want to do this is so that the joint can go into the butterfly peg or socket that's in the chest cavity. So it'll just act as a lever. The hand will act as a lever so that you can push it into the socket like you see on screen now. And you want to do it with obviously both arms so that both the arms are in the socket, and the figure is pretty much coming together now. So once we do that, we can take the neck and the head and plug the neck and head in. So heat up the head and the neck should plug straight in with maybe a little bit of force, not too much, and then you can plug the neck into the torso as well, and that's also just a heat and pop. Once that is done, we can move on to the ab section. So the ab section is very similar. If you look at the screen now, the ab section should plug into the bottom of the chest cavity, and there's like a socket at the bottom there. You heat up the socket and you push everything in, so it should fit in pretty nicely. And once that's done, you can put on the back plate, which basically covers everything up and rounds out the whole torso. So this, you can heat it up slightly and then push everything in, but with enough force everything should just fit in. So that's the top bit done. Now we can move on to putting the thighs together into the drop down hinges. So you heat up the thighs, you put it into the drop down hinges, you do it one at a time. It shouldn't take too long and it should fit in well. So you can see now on screen everything fits in pretty well, and the bottom half is also pretty much done. So now we can move on to connecting the top half and the bottom half. At the top of the crotch piece there, you can see a peg that's coming out. So you need to heat the bottom of the torso and stick it onto the peg. Once all of that is done, we are going to put the bandolier onto the figure, and all we need to do here is carefully place the bandolier onto the figure and use a dab of glue at the edge there. So you use a dab of glue and stick it onto the belt so that it will stay on the belt, and everything's done. Now with the trident, all you need to do is plug the bottom half into the top half, and the trident's pretty simple, and that's done as well. Now we have Ocean Emperor fully done, and I am really happy with how he turned out. I think it's a really good figure to add to my collection because I always wanted this version of the Ocean Emperor on my shelf. This was another really fun project, and there you have it, guys. I'm just so happy with this figure and how it turned out. Another action figure to add to my shelf, which I'm really excited about, and I'm excited about making more figures in the future as well. The things I really like about this figure is making the trident, because it was an accessory that was two-parted and I hadn't done that before, so that was interesting. With the joints, I didn't do anything too crazy, so I might want to experiment with a few different things. I'm trying to strengthen the wrist pegs and ankle pegs for my next figure, and yeah, the texture on this was also pretty fun, so hopefully you enjoyed it as well. But now with all the figures that I've created, there's a really cool shelf coming together, and I'm really appreciating what I've done so far, which is a little bit weird to say because I've made all these figures, but it's just so pleasing for me to look at because I've put in all this hard work and I've got a lineup to show for it. So I'm really happy with what I have so far, and that's on screen now. Hopefully you enjoy it as well. As always, thank you to all my Patreons: Chris Sudak, Daniel Lopez, Jonathan Zaragoza, Ryan Davis, Aiden, Joshua Rual, and Vinny. Thank you so much for subscribing to me and helping me with making all of these figures for you guys to enjoy as well. But I really enjoy making them myself, so thank you so much for enabling me to do that, and I am really appreciative of all the support you've given me so far. Thank you so much for being subscribers to my Patreon. Thank you also to Resione for believing me despite me being such a small channel. They've been supporting me with Resin, and also anytime I have any questions, they're always attentive and help me out with any of my queries. So thank you so much, Resione. For this particular print, I've used the Resione M58 60% and also the Resione Anti-Impact 40%, and I think it's a really good resin mix. I'm doing a whole bunch of experiments with a whole bunch of resins, so in the near future I'll do a video comparing all the different resins I've used for prints and which one I think is the best for action figures, so stay tuned for that. And also a big thank you to all of my YouTube viewers and subscribers. You've helped me grow so much over the past year, and we're reaching about 4,000 subscribers now. So I'm looking forward to hitting that milestone. I'm really excited to bring more action figures and more videos for you in the future. So stay tuned. Like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know in the comment section down below what figure you want to see next, and if your figure suggestion is chosen, your comment will be featured in one of my future videos. So leave me a comment and let me know what you want to see in terms of action figures.